I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't tell anyone what I felt. I just said no. And suddenly, everything changed. No one asked me why. No one cared if I was hurt. All they saw was that I had taken back a small piece of myself, and that terrified them. My name is Lila. I'm 27 years old. For most of my life, I was invisible in my own home. I did everything they asked. I smiled when I was upset. I apologized when I hadn't done anything wrong. I was the daughter who never spoke up, the sister who always gave in, the friend who never existed outside their shadow. And yet, I learned early, silence comes at a price. It isn't freedom, it's obedience. Every smile I gave was a transaction. Every act of kindness was a payment. And every time I tried to be myself, the consequences were sharp, like knives hidden in soft velvet. I thought I was strong. I thought I could survive it. But then, one day, I realized surviving wasn't enough, because surviving left me hollow. And I decided if I couldn't live freely, I would at least take my revenge in the only way I could. I grew up in a quiet town where the streets were empty and the nights were long. My mother, she had a way of making me feel small. Every word I spoke, every action I took was measured against her expectations. I gave up my life for you, Lila, she would say. You should be grateful. You owe me everything. I nodded. I smiled, even when inside I was breaking. My father, he was there, physically, but he was never really present. He worked, came home, watched the TV, and I learned not to expect anything else from him. So it was mostly just me and her. Her voice, her rules, her demands. By the time I was 10, I could sense her mood before she spoke. I could walk on eggshells with the best of them. And when my little sister Mara was born, everything changed again. Suddenly, my world revolved around her, not out of love, but out of obligation. Hurry, Lila, hold her, feed her, calm her down. I can't do this without you. I became her assistant, her shadow, her unpaid helper. I learned to hide my tears. I learned to swallow my anger. I learned to disappear so the world wouldn't notice my pain. Even at school, I was invisible. Teachers saw a helpful, mature girl, but no one saw the exhaustion under my smile. I began to understand something very early. If I wanted respect, if I wanted to be heard, I would have to earn it in silence. But earning it silently came with its own cost. Every childhood dream I had, every little spark of happiness was dimmed by her constant demands, her constant control, her constant reminders that nothing I did was ever enough. And yet, I survived. But surviving was only the beginning. By the time I was 16, I learned to fight silently, not with words, not with fists, but with small, careful acts that made my presence undeniable. I started keeping secrets, little rebellions no one noticed at first. A diary locked in my drawer, a letter I never sent, a friend I met behind their back. Every tiny victory felt like a pulse of freedom in a body that had been caged for years. And then, one day, I snapped. My mother had crossed a line, again. She demanded I skip my school trip to babysit Mara. She claimed it was my duty. I stared at her, really stared, and I said, no. Her face, I'll never forget. Shock, anger, disbelief, all in one breathless expression. "You ungrateful child," she screamed. "You will regret this." But I didn't. Not then. Not ever. That was the first time I realized standing up for myself could hurt her in ways she hadn't expected. And maybe, just maybe, I could take back pieces of my life, one quiet act at a time. I began planning small acts of revenge, not cruel, not violent, but strategic, each move calculated to remind her that I was no longer a puppet. I would stay silent in the moments she wanted noise. I would refuse the tasks she assumed I would do. I would protect my happiness, even if it meant she was unhappy. And with each act, I felt something grow inside me. Not anger, not hate, power, confidence, freedom. It was addictive and dangerous because I was starting to enjoy it. The first act of real rebellion was simple. I didn't pick up Mara one Saturday. I didn't answer her calls for help. I went to the library instead. I felt guilty for 5 minutes. Then I felt alive for the first time in years. I realized revenge isn't always about hurting someone else. Sometimes it's about reclaiming yourself. I left home without asking. Not in the middle of the night, not with a dramatic goodbye. I left quietly, the kind of quiet that scares people who are used to control. I told myself it was just for college, just a few years, just distance, but from fear of her reaction. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lips tight. "So you think you're better than us now?" That was her favorite sentence. Not, "I'll miss you," not, "Be safe," just accusation. I didn't answer. I couldn't. If I spoke, I would have cried, and crying always made her win. So I walked past her, out the door, into a life that didn't belong to her. College wasn't easy. I was poor, tired, lonely. But for the first time, my exhaustion was mine. No one was waiting to tell me I owed them for existing. I worked late nights, studied until my eyes burned, ate cheap food, lived small. And slowly, I grew. I learned how to make decisions without asking permission. I learned that silence can be peaceful, not punishing. But she never let me forget. The calls came, the messages. "You've changed. You're cold now. You don't need us anymore." Every success I had, she turned into betrayal. When I got my first job, she didn't say, "Congratulations." She said, "So now you think you're independent?" I realized something then. No matter what I did, she would never be proud. Because pride would mean she no longer owned me. And that's when my real plan began. Not to prove her wrong, not to fight, but to disappear from her control, emotion by emotion, decision by decision. I stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped reacting. And that was the beginning of the revenge she never saw coming. The manipulation didn't stop. It evolved. She learned new ways to reach me without raising her voice. Illness, emergencies, guilt dressed up as concern. "I'm not feeling well. I don't know how much time I have left. Family should come first." Every sentence was a rope tied gently around my throat. For a long time, it worked. I sent money, canceled plans, answered calls I didn't want to answer. I told myself I was being kind, responsible, mature. But kindness, when it's forced, turns into self-betrayal. The breaking point came quietly, not during an argument, not during a fight. It came during a normal phone call. She was talking about my sister, about how hard everything was, about how she needed me again, and suddenly I felt nothing. No guilt, no panic, no urge to fix it, just silence inside my chest. That scared me, because guilt had always been my compass, and now it was gone. She asked, "So what are you going to do?" And without planning it, without rehearsing, I said the truth. I can't do this anymore. There was a pause. Then her voice changed, cold, sharp. "So this is who you are now?" I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I let the silence sit between us, and in that silence, something ended. Not the relationship, the control. For the first time, I chose myself without asking permission. I hung up the phone and waited for the pain, but it didn't come. What came instead was relief. After that call, the world felt quieter. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. I realized revenge isn't always loud. It's not yelling. It's not breaking things. It's not public humiliation. Revenge is quiet, invisible, slow. It's living your life without letting anyone control it. Every decision I made from that moment was mine. I moved cities, changed jobs, stopped checking in constantly, and each time she called, I stayed calm, polite, detached. That drove her crazy, because I no longer reacted. No gasps, no apologies, no explanations. I watched as she tried to pull me back with stories of sacrifice, with guilt trips, with silent accusations. But I didn't budge, and that was my revenge. True revenge doesn't humiliate, it doesn't destroy, it transforms. It changes the one who was controlled into someone untouchable. I started my own traditions, made my own holidays, decided for myself what mattered. My sister Chloe noticed. She began to see me differently, as someone strong, someone who would protect her. And in teaching Chloe to protect herself, I healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Revenge isn't just about the other person, it's about reclaiming what they stole. My mother had tried to steal my voice, my choices, my self-respect. Now I speak freely, decide freely, live freely. And that freedom, that is the sweetest revenge. Sometimes I think back to the girl who stayed silent, the one who smiled through the pain, the one who apologized for things she didn't do. I see her clearly now, small, fragile, scared, and I feel compassion for her because she did the best she could with what she had. But she doesn't live here anymore. I do. I live in a world of my own making, a world where my choices are mine alone, where my voice is heard, where my life is not a transaction. I have learned that revenge is not about punishment, it's about liberation. It's about walking away from everything that tried to break you and proving to yourself that you are unbreakable. And every time my mother calls to try to pull me back, I smile quietly because I know she can never take this from me. Not my freedom, not my choices, not my voice. I am finally free. And in that freedom, I have found strength. I have found peace. I have found myself. The girl who survived has become the woman who thrives. And that is the revenge she could never imagine. Even as I moved into my own apartment, the quiet followed me. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy, pressing quiet of expectation left unspoken. I could still hear my mother's words echoing. You left us. You owe this family. Every phone call felt like walking through a room filled with invisible chains. I wanted to scream, to hang up, to finally say, "I am not your debt." But something inside me hesitated. I had been trained to absorb guilt like air, and so I listened quietly. Even when Chloe's voice squeaked in the background, asking simple questions, I felt a pang. Her life intertwined with mine, yet she remained free in ways I wasn't. Every memory of carrying burdens I didn't choose made me tense. Yet, in the silence, I began to notice something. I was still breathing, still here, still capable of choosing differently. Months passed, and I began to notice the temptation to return to the fold, to appease, to give in, to let my past dictate my actions. It wasn't just money or time, it was control. Every small request, every soft plea, every quiet sigh from home felt like a trap disguised as love. I remembered birthdays missed, moments sacrificed, nights spent awake in worry, and yet part of me ached to be good, to be the daughter who never caused disappointment. I realized this was the pivot point. Would I let guilt govern me, or would I reclaim my life? And that night, as I walked alone through the city streets, I made a silent promise. No more shadows, no more invisible chains. Chloe had grown, and with her growth came questions. "Why do we have to do everything for Mom?" she asked one evening, sitting cross-legged on my small couch. I could see the struggle mirrored in her young eyes. I wanted to tell her everything, to warn her, protect her, prepare her. But words are tricky. Too much too soon, and she might shrink under their weight. I chose instead to teach through calm example. "I'm learning to take care of myself," I said softly. Not, "I'm leaving you behind," not, "You owe me too," just the truth. And in that moment, I felt the first flicker of hope that maybe she could avoid the chains I bore. Living alone forced me to confront habits I didn't even know I had. Every urge to apologize for being late, for not sending money, for existing on my own terms, I had to face it. I began rewriting the rules silently. My life belongs to me. I do not negotiate my peace for approval. Love does not require sacrifice of self. It was painful. Every call from home triggered the old guilt. Every thank you I didn't say felt like a betrayal. And yet, slowly, the rules began to stick. I was learning the language of freedom, soft, calm, yet firm. The call came late one night, Chloe's birthday. A simple request on the surface. "Can you send something for her?" But the tone, the subtext, the weight of expectation was all there. I sat on my bed, phone in hand, heart racing, and I realized this wasn't about Chloe. It was about control, about proving loyalty, obedience, guilt. I could feel every year of silent sacrifice pressing down on me. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time, I said quietly to myself, "I will not let this define me." I imagined telling them no, not harshly, not angrily, just calmly. A single word of boundary, yet it felt like reclaiming decades of lost self. Even now, the memories linger, the sharp words, the impossible expectations, the silent disappointments. Sometimes I feel a pang of guilt, old echoes trying to tug me back, but I remind myself those shadows no longer define me. I confront the past not with anger, but with understanding. I allow myself to feel everything I couldn't feel before. The sadness, the loneliness, the frustration, they are all valid. And in facing them, I find clarity. I understand the patterns, the fears, the pain that shaped them, not as an excuse for their behavior, but as a lesson for me. Every tear I cried, every silent night I endured, every burden I carried alone, they all built the resilience I have today. And I use that resilience to protect my heart, to guide my choices, to love with boundaries. Now I wake each day knowing I am the author of my life. The past is not erased, but it no longer controls me. I make choices freely, love fully, and move forward without fear. I see Chloe growing stronger, braver, and I smile knowing she will not carry the same weight I did. My mother's control, my father's absence, they no longer shadow my world. Every quiet victory, every small act of independence adds to the life I am creating. I feel a pulse of power in my chest that belongs only to me. It is soft yet unyielding. It is calm yet unstoppable. I realize that the true revenge, the deepest victory, is living fully, living with courage, living with love, living without compromise to my own soul. And with that realization, I step into my days, whole, unshakable, and free.